What makes Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands so unique, magic, and special? It's not only the capacity of his director to create characters with very deep psychological values and contradiction and involve them in a sort of classic fairy tale provided with strong visual power. In my opinion, the secret of why we love Edward and his work is because we identify with him and with his loneliness. He is an automa, but is profoundly human as well as the members of the family who host him. Caroline Thompson, screenwriter of the movie, said that Edward Scissorhands is about a feeling like you don't belong and feeling you wanna belong, you trying to belong, feeling like you should belong and you can't belong. Who has never experienced this feeling in his life? Who has never felt excluded, out of a place, or rejected at a certain moment of his existence?
Oh, I'm sorry, monsieur. I am Madame Petralini. These children are in my circus.
Children? They're monsters. Curtain time! You look beautiful, darling. I wouldn't change a thing.
I've got a light, Mr. Cameron.
No, that's all right. Got it. Luella.
Yes, Dad?
This is probably the most personal Tim Burton's movie because he's telling us something about his youthness and the problems he had in the relationships with the people of Burbank, which was where he lived with his family, and it's also the city that inspired the suburbia of the movie. The director said, "The manifestation of that image became a reality and it probably surfaced when I was a teenager, because it was a very adolescent thing. It had to do with relationships. I felt unable to communicate. It was this feeling that how you look and how people see you clash with what you have inside. A very common feeling. I think a lot of people feel the same way, because it's frustrating and sad to feel something and see that it does not go outside." With this movie, Tim Burton is telling us a very important thing. He's saying, "I will share with you my condition of outcast, which is yours after all."
Except one of us. We accept one of us.
Gooba gobble, gooba gobble.
We accept her. We accept her. Google gobble. Google gobble. One of us. One of us. Google gobble.
Rejection, exclusion, isolation, these are the elements that make us empathize with the protagonist and understand his state of mind, follow his misadventure with passion and enthusiasm. Another theme wisely used by Tim Burton is the contrast and fight of beauty and creativity
Do you take my very breath away, I swear, look at this.
versus ugliness and bad taste. The protagonist's aesthetic appearance arouses rejection, hilarity, or fear in others, overshadowing his moral qualities. Someone who is externally intimidating, who has menacing physical characteristics, but who holds a unique and wonderful internal world. As Tim Burton said, Edward gives very mixed feelings and emotions. He's got something inside, the split of simple, complicated, beautiful, scary, elegant, clumsy, all the things that mix lives up. On the other side, the urbanization and its inhabitants are the representation of a conformist, ambiguous, puritanical society that is characterized for a very bad taste. In Burton's own words, first came the image, linked to that feeling of not being accepted. Then out of that came the images of eyes and head growths as a natural consequences of him becoming useful and accessible. And then there was the word that Edward arrived at, that arose from remembering my childhood in that world of urbanizations and the sensation that aroused in me. I grew up in a suburb and I still don't understand some things. There is a kind of ambiguity, a void, and this is something that I received very strongly from my family. The paintings that my family had on the walls, I never understood that they liked them, that they bought them, that someone gave them as a gift. It was almost as if they had been there forever and yet no one had ever looked at them. I remember sometimes I would sit and look at them and think, what the hell is that? What are those resin grapes? Where did they get them from? What do they mean? Growing up in a suburb is like growing up in a place where there is no sense of history, no sense of culture, no sense of passion for anything. I never had the feeling that people like music. No one showed the slightest emotion. It was very strange. Why is this happening here? Where have I been? You never felt that there was the slightest attachment to things. So you were forced to adapt and eliminate a large part of your personality, or develop a very strong inner life that made you feel left out. So how do you represent in a fairy tale a premise like this one? How do you visually express this impossibility to get close to others, to touch them for fear of hurting them? And here it comes a genius idea. Scissor. Burton go for them because it's a very suburban type of instrument. Edward can touch, but he has emotions. He wants to feel things, but because of the sharpness of his fingers, can't actually touch somebody. Then we have the hyper-realistic world of the city, in which its inhabitants act in a depersonalized way, and as if responding to the design of a superior and homogenizing will, versus the obscure world of a Gothic castle, full of beauty, mystery, and creativity. And this is also a visual representation of the conflict between the unexpressed beauty of the personal inner world and the illusory and false beauty of the outer world. It's about fantasy versus logic, imagination versus rationality. And last but not least, we have the selfishness and individualism of a neighborhood's inhabitants, whose personal relationships are frivolous and marked only by personal interest or by the morbidity of gossip. Edward Scissorhands is also a character film, created and based on them, where the narrative is completely at their service. Everything in the film tells us about their personality, their character, their mood, and their lives, without having to make it explicit with dialogue.
Have you gone blind? Can't you see there's a vehicle in my driveway? Oh, yes. Well, I'm surprised you don't realize that means I'm busy.
Thanks to Tim Burton's ability and his profound knowledge of the mechanism of silent cinema, we would be able to understand the evolution of the film even if we remove the audio. Let's take this scene for example. Despite the almost total absence of dialogue, thanks to Tim Burton's visual narrative, we understand very well what is happening. With the image of Joyce pressing the lemon, the director suggests that she and the other neighbors are squeezing Edward out of self-interest, and as we can clearly see from this picture, she tries to work Edward as she craves the sexual company of a young man. Or just take this other, where we immediately understand, thanks to that gash in the ceiling and the small figure of Peg, that she will be the one to bring Edward out of his isolation, bringing a ray of light into his life. Here instead, Tim Burton plays on repetition by filming Kim and Edward's room in a very similar way, and showing us how after all Edward is not so different from any teenager who decorates his room with what most stimulates his imagination and his own desire. The quantity of visual jokes present in the film is truly extraordinary.
Kim, this is Edward who's gonna live with us. Hi.
Once again, a proof of Tim Burton's profound knowledge of the silent film. If we combine this with the director's ability to find always new ideas for jokes related with scissors...
Thanks, Edward. Hey, hi, George Monroe. Whoa, it's a heck of a handshake you got there, Ed. I don't know what it is.
Then we understand why this film masterfully alternates fantasy, drama, and comedy. Let's have a look at this other scene, when Edward is going to the mall and suddenly he sees Kim. This is not only one of the most beautiful, emotional and melancholy scenes, but also the one that could perhaps sum up the entire movie, and without any dialogue. Here we see how Edward lives in a limbo, halfway between the world of the extravagant neighbors of suburbia who take advantage of him, and the world of his dreams, Kim's world. See how the director established that all the expression of affection of Kim's boyfriend for her must be done by hands. Focus on the final hug, the same hug that at the end of the movie Edward refused to Kim, because with his hands he just can't. In this very moment, Edward is dreaming of having hands, to be able to touch Kim as her boyfriend is doing. But then it comes the ugly reality. The van's door excludes him from that world of dreams, and the neighbor and this billboard reminds him that he will never have that kind of love. And Tim Burton makes us understand all these in a superb, subtle, elegant way, using only visual tools. This is pure cinema.
I can't.
This is the tragedy of someone who cannot get close to others, touch and embrace them without hurting them. A wonderful metaphor about the impossibility of being normal. Yes, Edward is an automaton, but he feels more than the humans around him. There is more sensitivity in one of his sisters than in the hundreds of fingers of the individualistic citizen of suburbia. Such a person cannot live long among uncouth and superficial people. Edward will be expelled forever from that society and condemned to solitude. But in that castle, he will be also protected from what the Italian writer Mario Pras defined the sprawling cities that have invaded the face of the earth and secrete their black sap of anxiety.